Great to meet you all. I see some familiar faces, lots of new faces. I'm going to start with a quick introduction on myself, and then I'll pass it back to Farrell. So my name is KJ. I'm one of the co-founders of Kaizen, based out of New York City. And really, the way I describe myself, my team, our company, we're a bunch of nerds who love to write code. We love to build beautiful websites, and we love to do design. And at the end of the day, what we do, we build recreation software for registrations. We build software for program registration, facility reservations, memberships, campsites, the whole gamut, special events permitting. But today, really want to talk about what's under the hood. And what we do is a bridge to the customer experience. And we're going to talk mostly about what that customer experience looks like. So I'll jump in, like Farrell said, talking more on the technology side and how technology can help link you to the customer each and every day. So with that, I'll pass it off to Farrell.
All right. So when we're thinking about customer experience, here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about your ideal customer experience. What is your ideal customer experience? And while you're thinking about that for a second, I'm going to tell you, I'm Farrell Buller. I'm here in Colorado. If I haven't met you, I'd love to. If I've had the opportunity to, thanks for showing up. It's always nice to see a familiar name and a familiar face. I have the opportunity to work with 110%. And we do projects in the lines of financial sustainability, ethical decision-making, and adaptive leadership. So prior to this role, I spent about 20 years in government. So I may have walked in your shoes, starting as a part-time camp staff. I was a Parks and Recreation director. I had the pleasure of serving as a city manager and a deputy for a couple years as well. So I get to wear a handful of different hats. So remembering your ideal experience as a customer, here's what we're going to do. We're going to drop you into a breakout room. Again, if you don't want to go, you can stay right here with KJ and I. And I'm going to give you about 5 or 6 minutes to just introduce yourself, say hi, good morning, good afternoon, whatever you want to do, and share a little bit about your ideal customer experience. You can share, where was it? What happened? What was the feeling? What'd you get? Why did it come to mind? If you don't have one, listen to somebody else's. And if you do have one, I'd ask you to share your story in about, kind of that 30-second mark, kind of in about a breath. Not necessarily the whole thing. You all can talk about that later. All right, yeah. So Matt's going to open up breakout rooms, and then we'll see you back here in about 5 minutes. Thanks so much. All right, KJ, we'll give people like 4 or 5 minutes total, but as people are going into their own breakout rooms, you and I had talked really briefly about customer experience. And when you start to think about customer experience from kind of that higher level, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, Farrell, we were just jamming and talking about personal experiences that we've had. And the one that I was thinking about is the company Apple. And, for Apple, at least, and I think it's important to realize that with customer experience, you're going to have the customer experience that is both physical and digital. I guess Apple does both, but then on the other end of the spectrum, you might have something like Disneyland. And Disneyland is that strictly physical experience when you go to Disneyland, when you go to Disney World as well. And at least with Apple, I think a lot about the emotions that are evoked when you're walking into an Apple store or you're getting that new Apple phone. It's sleek, it's modern, it's refreshing. There's this kind of like calming, cooling feeling that you have when you walk in. Yes. That's what we're going to talk about later today. It's kind of like that emotion that you feel as a customer. And then of course there's the service element. And I think a lot of people here, if you have an iPhone or not, Apple does pride itself in its customer service and that retention element where the new phone comes out. And even if you have a great phone and the updated phone, you kind of become a fan, like a fanboy or a fangirl of that specific company. So I think Apple does a really good job with that retention and service piece. Yeah.
Yeah, they really do. It's interesting when you talked about that too, because, if you know the Disney experience and you've been there and you've participated, like that's one perspective that you have about what they're offering. And then I was thinking for people that have never been to Disney, they've probably heard about it's a great experience, or they have great training, right? Or they have these touches. And so it's like just that reputation that's carried, right? And Apple's similar, like the reputation, like you go by their store in the mall and you're right, like when you said that, like the cooling lights, or it feels calm or really clean, right? It feels really clean. And then the product, like if you get it and what it connects to and how does it help make your life easier?
Definitely.
Yeah, I like those concepts.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing that's really unique about Disney too is you mentioned training, and I have read that on day one, because I believe they have 150,000 employees just across their parks. And
Yep.
on day one, they teach everyone that you have your role, you have your day-to-day responsibilities, but your number one goal is to provide happiness and to spread happiness,
Mm.
right? So I think it's down to the training. I've also read about you also get that feeling of cleanliness at Disney. Everything's very clean, very organized. And that's all the underlying design of there's not a single area that doesn't have a trash can within 30 feet of each other, 20 to 30 feet, right? And
Yep.
those are the things that you don't think about when you're there, but when you reflect on it, that's what makes it that customer experience. Yeah.
It does. Well, and when I look at the chat of what people are talking about of what they're looking to do with their customers, like getting new customers, right? And that approach with maybe an Apple or a Disney or just in your own community is a little bit different than making sure people know that we have, but also like providing a seamless experience. So I think what you're going to talk about a bit today is kind of that seamless experience um, from the technological side of just what's possible, right? Not knowing what's right in every organization, but definitely what's possible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So if you're on and you didn't want to go into a room, but you want to chat, let's see, increasing memberships. Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that idea too. If you want to chat about something, you are welcome to drop it in. Or if you want to come off your microphone, and if you have an ideal customer experience, I'd love to know what was it that made it ideal? Like, what was it that made it a great customer experience? You know, one of the things that I learned, and we'll bring people back in like 1 minute, but one of the things that I was thinking about with ideal customer experiences is the places that I frequent, right? And where I just feel comfortable. So although I might not have like an exact only thing that I do, it's like I do know that I have to feel comfortable, or I start to have to trust what's going to happen there, right? And then that makes me go back, like that repetition. If it's duplicatable and replicatable and I know what I can expect, I think it takes a little bit of the uncertainty out of there's just so much uncertainty happening. So when I can have something that feels really calm and similar, I like that piece with regards to customers.
Absolutely.
All right, well, welcome back. I see people are coming back. I'm guessing we've closed your rooms, which are delightful. Some people hit that button really quick, like get me out of here. Good morning, Jan. And other people are like, wait, I'm still talking, like as the countdown happens. All right, we'll give people about 30 more seconds to come on back. You know, one of the other facts that I looked up this morning, thank you, ChatGPT, and thank you for whoever taught me how to use it. But if we have a great customer experience, we generally tell, you know, 3 to 4 people, right? Our closest people, we're like, oh my gosh, I was there. That was great. If we have a terrible customer experience, we're telling almost 4 times as many people. What in the world? What is coming out of our mouths? People know. So I think that's really telling to understanding somebody else's perspective. And before it gets shared with 4 times as many people, how do we help them hit pause? Or how might we help hit pause, right? So I was looking that up because I was thinking of your technology pieces that you're going to teach us first, KJ, and I was like, ugh, and with social media, I don't know, maybe it's even crazier than that. I don't know, but okay, well, everybody's back. Thanks for coming back. I hope you met one other person. I hope they were nice to you. I'm sure they were because we're all Parks and Rec-ish. All right, KJ, I'm going to turn it back over so you can start to share some
Perfect.
of the foundational components and some of the framework pieces when we're thinking about customer experience.
Awesome. Lovely. Hope everyone had a great breakout. Farrell and I were talking about Disneyland and Apple being our 2 favorite customer experiences. We branded it Dapple. I'm not sure if that's going to stick, but yeah, I hope folks had a great discussion there. Awesome. So we're going to start by just going into a bit of what is the customer experience in the lens of Parks and Recreation. And of course, want to start with a definition. Um, Customer experience is summed as a series of all interactions that a customer or a patron has with a service, brand, or product. And I think it's important to note that this can be both digital and physical. In the Parks and Recreation world, I think this rings very true. You, of course, have the physical experience of being in the parks, engaging in programs, memberships, and then the digital side, which we're going to focus on a bit more today. I want to start, don't want to get too technical, but I do think that this framework of the user experience versus user interface is very important as you start to think about what does our customer journey look like in my department. So at least here in the more kind of technical realm, we think of user interface as what's on the surface level. What do you see? It's if you were to go to Amazon.com and start a shopping cart experience, it's the visual design. It's the look and the feel of the buttons. It's the layout. It's the architecture of the website. And it's also the creative element of, is this catching my eye? Is this layout organized? Is it messy? And then there's the under the hood part, which is UX, user experience. And that's actually the emotion. What emotion do you feel when you're at Disneyland? What emotion do you feel when you're shopping at Apple or you're on the Amazon website? And then a really important part of this is the user journey. The user journey, and you can think about this in Parks and Rec too, the user journey isn't actually when the user journey doesn't start when someone goes to your website or your registration software. The user journey starts so much before that. It's how does anyone learn about the offerings that you have? Where do they collect information? Is it word of mouth? Is it through flyers? Is it social media? And then, of course, there's the technical aspect, which is actually a lot more tied to behavioral psychology and then translating that into code that builds the website or the physical building, like a castle at Disneyland. This is just like a quick visual for you to understand, again, UI being the interface, that surface level, and then UX being what's under the hood. And I thought I would also add a bit of a fun kind of meme here. UI and UX, there's a very delicate balance. If you focus on UI too much, you might be wasting a little bit of time. You may not be actually taking the most optimal route. And then if you think about UX too much, you may be compromising on the actual visual element, the aesthetic. And I think it's a very delicate balance. I think it's a very important dance to play between the two. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today as well. And I want to start with some stats. I think, Farrell, the stat that you shared about if you have a good experience, you're likely to tell a couple people. If you have a bad experience, you're likely to maybe make a fake Google review account and leave a bad review. You're much more likely to tell a lot more people. And we see that in our daily lives all the time. But why does user experience matter today in Parks and Rec? I think one thing to note on the digital element is everyone has a smartphone. It's hard to believe now, but quite literally 92% of Americans own a smartphone. And that number is only increasing. And on top of that, data and statistics show that citizens, for some reason, are still not satisfied with local government digital services. These services are top-notch. The people who work in there are dedicating their lives to providing these services, but there's a bit of that disconnect that citizens feel with the actual interfaces that they're interacting with. And that also comes down to trust. Trust is the most important predictor in the digital experience. So the digital experience being strong actually builds trust. So it's kind of this flywheel effect where the stronger you have a stronger digital experience that you have, the more likely you are to build that trust and that retention with the customer. And then I wanted to also highlight a couple problems that we're solving for. And I think we can all say that across departments, these are problems that unify us. And they're problems that are not just limited to technology and software, but across department needs. Things like accessibility. There's certain departments in Colorado, for example, that are required to adhere to WCAG and ADA compliance standards. Things like ease of use. Is it mobile friendly? Is it tablet friendly? Customer retention, customer service, And then one thing we'll talk about today is discoverability. Really underrated topic in the customer experience is how easy is it for me as a customer to actually discover your offerings? How many clicks does it take for me to actually get to your offerings as well? And one thing that you can do, because often the question is, great, what do I do to actually understand what our customer experience looks like today? This is a pretty fun whiteboarding exercise that I think anyone can do alone, with your department leaders, with other department staff. And it's really interesting to actually do this as a team and understand how different people on your team think about the customer journey. And there's no one road or one perfect kind of method from start to finish, but generally you can think about it like the start being, hey, I know that I want to have this product. I know that I want to, kind of laid it out here in this next slide. I know that I want to reserve X facility or register for Y program. The next step is awareness. How are your patrons then learning about the options that you have? Is it social media? Is it word of mouth? And then there's interest. Which of these offerings is actually going to catch my eye? And then there's competition. Am I going to go to a private institution where that offering is available, or is it going to be public? And that's where the interest element is so important, of how are you actually drawing people in? And then, of course, there's the purchase. And there's a lot of great data right now out on payments as well. I'm curious if, there might be departments here that offer Google Pay or Apple Pay or like tap to pay functionality. When you go into a coffee shop most days and you tap your phone, that is a seamless user experience. You tap your phone, you've made your payment, and it's easy for me to give my money to that restaurant or that coffee shop. In a similar lens, how easy is it for a patron to actually make a payment? Something to think about. And then, of course, retention. I just transacted with the department. What's next? Am I becoming made aware of other similar offerings? If this caught my eye, am I knowing about XYZ future offerings that are related to that as well? And a lot of this does tie into, again, social media outreach as well. And then, of course, advocacy. As Farrell was saying earlier, am I now going to go tell my family and friends about that experience? This is just one example of that customer journey. And I guarantee that this looks very different for every department. And it's a worthy exercise to kind of go through that and understand what this look like for us. What are we doing very well across this user journey? And where do we have gaps and faults? And I saw someone, I think it was Jordana from Redwood City, mentioned telling a story as a really important part of the customer experience. And this is really tying into the emotion. What kind of emotion do you want to invoke when people think about your department? Do you want people to feel comforted, welcomed? Do you want people to feel thrilled? These are all really important things to define as you think about storytelling and the customer experience. And then also, how do you want to invoke these emotions? Is it through video, text, imagery, those sort of things? I really like this quote from Laura Stein. She's one of the designers at Bruce Mao Design. I'm not sure if anyone here has been to Miami in the last couple of years, but Miami built this beautiful park it's about an 8-mile park underneath one of their major highways. I believe it's a subway line and a highway. And this is just a great quote from the designer who actually helped design this park. And the quote goes, "Every sign, every color, every single design choice is a signal to people and has the opportunity to resonate with people and say something about who is welcome there." Just a quote that I really enjoyed. And it's about the intricacies. It's everything from the font, the color, the typography, all those things tie in together to invoke a certain kind of emotion. One idea that we propose to a lot of the departments that we work with, because oftentimes the question is, this all sounds great, but how do we actually act on this? We're not able to hire a consultant right now to do a rebrand, or we're not able to, hire a consultant to do this customer journey road mapping. One idea that we have seen be wildly successful is photography. Oftentimes, when departments have their offerings on their websites or their recreation software systems, there's usually two kind of gamut of ideas. You have the bulletin board of here's all our offerings, here's our facilities, here is, just a list of the things that we have for programs as well. And on the other end, you can tell a story with videos, with images. And one thing I highly recommend, and this is something that can generally be very cost effective as well, is finding a local photographer that can actually take beautiful, stunning videos and images of your facilities. This, for example, is in Pima County in Arizona. And we have found, just from like the data analytics of monitoring our software systems, that the retention of users when you switch over to this kind of video and image driven format is much higher. People are scrolling through the photos, people are looking at amenities, and people are taking the time to understand what is Pima County's story, what is Crown Mountain's story, as an example. So just a really simple, low lift way. If you have any questions on like how do we find a photographer, how does this fit in, more than happy to spend time one-on-one with folks, but really simple way. And in the last webinar we did, I actually talked about Airbnb as an example. Who here, maybe by show of hands with anyone whose camera on, has been in an Airbnb or reserved an Airbnb in the last couple weeks or months? Awesome. Believe it or not, before, I believe it was 2013 or 2015, Airbnb did not have a photo system. It was just descriptions, it was amenities, and it was like a simple snapshot of here's where you're staying. In 2015, they enacted a system to start to require residents to upload photos of a certain megapixel. And in some situations, they hired photographers to take photos for people who are putting their houses on Airbnb. They immediately, year over year, saw a 30% increase in revenue for those same available bookings. And that was simply because they started to tell a story about the space versus leaving it to text, as an example. These are just some screenshots, some of my favorite things that I've seen across the board with departments. And what I wanted to just emphasize here is this is the physical part. The story, the physical part, the events you do, the programs you have, the facilities you have for reservation, they tie back into the story, and it kind of creates this symbiotic relationship. One other actionable exercise that we often work on with departments is this exercise called how many clicks. Very simple. You could even do it today. You could do it after this webinar. Start from Google and time and measure how many clicks does it take for a patron to get to the registration software. How many clicks does it take to maybe get from your broader municipality website to your Parks and Rec website, and then from there to the registration website. And the reason this click is very important is the moment you create too many steps from getting to the end goal of transacting or making a reservation or a registration, you're creating friction, which can lead to the opposite of customer retention, as an example. And again, these are these simple exercises that can get you in the mindset of how do we make it easier for a resident to embark on that customer experience or that journey. Awesome. Farrell, anything to add before I jump into the hard to reach section?
I just like I don't know, when you say how many clicks, I used to think about like how many licks does it take to get to the center of TikTok, which probably isn't what we're talking about, but I do think it's fascinating when we go from our professional and our practitioner hat to our customer hat, even inside of our own organization. And I don't think I did that as a frontline staff enough. But certainly once I, was in a different position and I had kids or whatever, right? Because all my programs are really free. If I wanted to go work out, I just walked down the hall. But once I started actually signing up for classes in my own organization in Erie, I learned a few things. And so I think to your point of the clicks and to your point of the experience, how easy is it for people to pay? I think we should be our own customer a little bit and at least try our own process and see what happens. I mean, if you want to start learning somewhere that costs nothing extra, I think those are really great tips. I wish I would have done that a lot sooner in my career. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Sweet. We're now going to move into the section on hard to reach. And hard to reach refers to the people who aren't always seen, or the people whose voices aren't always heard? And these are just some questions to think about, which is one, does your digital presence resonate with the various segments of individuals you are serving? I think a lot of this actually has to do with letting go of potential preconceived notions of who actually is in our community. There's obviously lots of data out there in terms of here's the demographics of our community, but actually taking that data into account and seeing from I have a list here in terms of demographics, age, gender, ethnicity, religion, education, profession, income. All these things are so different from one department to another. And I think it's really important to think about how does that digital presence resonate with each segment? And how does that customer journey, so that road mapping exercise with the road, that actually looks quite different for different populations. It could look different for senior residents. It could look different for youth. It could look different for someone who's potentially an immigrant. Those are all different demographics that influence the digital presence. And I think it's very important to think about that mapping journey. And while we can't create one website for every demographic, I do think that those are the kind of things that tie your online digital presence together, is looking out for the people who don't have a voice or aren't always heard, essentially. And then another thing is, how are you assessing for those needs and wants? And I think that actually ties into what's called the psychographics, which is the things that you may not necessarily find through a data gathering exercise, but it's the personalities, the values, the opinions, the interests. And I think a really underrated element of this is discovering those needs. How are you discovering those? Are you launching surveys, for example, after you have an event or a new program that you've launched? Are you launching those surveys to actually understand satisfaction levels and predict retention for the future as well? And again, these are all things that you don't need to purchase a new, recreation software for this. There's a lot of tools that are add-ons that can allow you to do things like surveying. I'm sure people have been on Amazon actually, or even I believe Apple has this as well. When you're done buying a product, you immediately get that pop-up. Very simple, or even at the airport when you're leaving a restroom and it has a happy face and a sad face, and you click a button and you leave your feedback. That feedback collection, at least putting my hat on as someone who is building the software, that feedback collection is actually how we determine what goes into our software system, what tools do we build. And that feedback is something that can be collected very easily outside of a existing software system. And then the last thing I'll kind of leave with here is catering to diverse populations as well. Like I mentioned earlier, 92% of Americans are using smartphones. And this concept of having a desktop at home, it's kind of a foreign concept now. And if you think about it as well, there's data and research that supports that underrepresented populations are also more likely to own a smartphone than a laptop or a desktop. So in many ways, we can use that data as a way to optimize for iOS, Android, mobile, tablet, and you're able to reach a much more diverse and wider audience because most people are on those devices as well. And then, of course, I think the second piece is table stakes, which is language translations. There are systems out there, there's plenty that allow you to natively translate a language into another, but just something to think about, which is, the dialects that are being spoken. Is it an easy way for someone to even discover the button to go from English to Spanish or a different language? Those are all things that are very, very relevant and important to the customer experience as well. And then another idea too is when you think about digital experiences, I'm not by a show of hands if anyone here is also using like membership passes that are digital, or are your passes physical? Maybe anyone have digital passes by a show of hands? Awesome. I love to see that many people using digital passes. So this is another kind of supporting point on what people and residents want to see, which is the evolution of passes going from physical to digital. QR codes, for example, are ubiquitous at this point all over the country. And I know there's lots of departments that leverage QR codes, but QR codes can actually also be leveraged for things like memberships. And that's just something to think about. in the future. It's also saving a lot of materials and cost because you're no longer having to have these physical, key fobs and badges. And QR codes can be uniquely generated for every single user for every single membership. And imagine being able to, for example, pull up to a campsite or a rec center, and you just pull out your phone, and right next to all the other things in your digital wallet, you have a membership pass. And that membership pass becomes part of your cohesive experience of life. I have my credit cards, I have my membership pass, and that's one of the ways you can drive some of that user experience and retention as well. This is a lot of text, so I'm not going to read it all, but just something to think about. I'm not sure if there's any departments here from Colorado, but if you are in Colorado, you know very well that the entire state of Colorado has enforced this law called HB 21-1110. And this is not only in Colorado, it's starting to happen all over the country. But digital accessibility is important now more than ever. This is for disabilities that are visual disabilities that you also can't see. And the importance of this is that, for example, in Colorado, the state is starting to enforce penalties, fines for websites that are not ADA and WCAG compliant, as an example. This is starting to happen in other states, like I mentioned. And these are things that I would encourage just departments to start to think about. There's actually a lot of, I can share these as a follow-up resource as well. There's a lot of free plugins and websites you can play around with, where you can take your current website, your current software, plug it into that plugin, and it'll actually give you a percentage rating on how ADA and WCAG compliant this is. Obviously, the formality is, hey, we're going to hire a consultant who's going to study our website and help us redesign it. But this is just something to think about. All signs point to this becoming the norm over the next couple of years, not just in Colorado, but across the country. And it's for a very important and good reason as well. But just want people to think about this as they think about preparation for their digital experience over the next 3, 4, 5 years as well. Awesome. With that, I'll pass it back to Farrell.
All right, thanks. As you were talking about people that are hard to reach, or yes, some of the technological pieces, I'm reading a couple of people's answers of like, and thank you, Jordana, for the Tootsie Pop reminder. That says my age. So Joe is on here, and he's in California, and I just want him to share a super quick story, if you wouldn't mind, Joe.
Yep, no problem.
He was sharing a story with me in California recently where he wanted to connect with like a different component of the community and a cultural relationship. And so will you just share that with the group? Because I don't think we always realize how with low resource, we can just start knowing people and building trust and building relationship.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Good afternoon, everyone on the East Coast. Good morning, everyone that's still on the West Coast. My name is Joe Pinsalon with KTUA, a consultant, primarily focusing on developing parks master plans and active transportation plans. And the story Farrell was referencing, as we were doing some research in the city of West Covina, and I was walking around the certain park and taking photos, checking out park conditions and whatnot. And I see a group of gentlemen playing tennis. And as I was taking photos, I'm Filipino, and I was wondering, I can hear some dialogue from far away, so I just kind of start walking a little closer. Then I realized it was Tagalog. So then, as I was walking towards the court taking photos, I was wearing a safety vest, and one of them just came up to me and said, "Hey, sir, what are you doing?" And I said, well, I'm taking photos of the park. And I said, hey, kumusta na? And they're like, oh, you're Filipino. I said, well, I'm Filipino, but I don't know any Tagalog. I only understand the bad words when I'm in trouble with my wife. And so I kept, so they started to ask me questions of what I was doing. I said, hey, I'm just here, looking at your parks. Do you mind if I ask you guys a few questions? I'm like, sure. So they actually invited me in the tennis court because these were all mostly senior Filipino guy. So to me, it reminded me like hanging out with my uncles and stuff like that. So there was already that connection, there's that cultural connection there. And so they were just, I just started saying, what do you guys like about your tennis courts? I noticed there's some pickleball striping over there. How do you guys interact with them? And, so they provided me their feedback. I ended up just hanging out there for probably a good 30 minutes, just talking with them and getting some solid feedback on how they felt about the park system, things they would like to see and whatnot. And so I said, hey, if we're able to do workshops here, can I get your information? And would you guys come out? And talk with us about about your park system, things that you would like to see. They're, oh, absolutely. Is there going to be food there? I said, well, we can work through that if you guys are willing to do barbecues and stuff like that. And so we were actually just talking about ways to get because where I live in San Diego, it's a large Filipino population. And when I was in the planning group of our community, they would never show up to any of these facilities until you would actually encourage them to come. And so having that cultural connection with these folks in West Covina is one of those things I learned through that process is kind of relating to them. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing? And then that's also a familiar face that they can relate to. So I think if we're able to get the project, we'd be able to, I'd be able to reach out to them and get them into that project. But just, having that interaction with them, that friendly, just being personable, that sort of thing, I think is really key. And it, made some friends out of it. Took a couple of pictures. I got invited to a barbecue, those types of things, which is kind of nice. So
You never told me you got the invite. We didn't get the, no, I'm just teasing. All right, no, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I think sometimes we forget about, or maybe we have this role on there, or this hat or this title. And we also forget about how great and how much magic we can add to somebody's day, literally by walking up and saying hi, like, hey, why are you playing here? Hey, thanks for coming back. Like, some of these real personable and relationshipable pieces, a lot of us probably grew up with them, but what I know nationally is a lot of maybe our part-time or some of our newer grads that we're hiring, they don't have the same training and upbringing of what's kind of some of those etiquette things, right? So thanks for sharing that, Joe. I just loved it when you told me, and I was like, I don't know, I'm just a girl from Colorado. However, not being concerned of walking around or knowing people. I know when I was in Illinois at Jan Arnold, there was a group of teenagers all hanging out in one of their basketball courts, and our group definitely stood out walking through that neighborhood. And the kids came up and talked to us and were like, why do you come here? What do you like here? And they thought it was really fun to talk. So anyhow, so thank you. I want to share 5 ideas, and then I'm going to drop you back out into a breakout room really quick. 5 ideas on what are you doing to enhance the customer experience, or maybe not enhance the customer experience, right? And I'm going to throw these out kind of quick. What are your staff talking about in front of customers? Right? I know it's like the frontline people. I realized early on it didn't matter if I was great or if I was okay, if my frontline people were not great. So investing in our frontline people. I won't go into a story, but I'll tell you that, well, I might a little bit. A whole group of friends gets on the bus to go to Maroon Bells. Everybody's excited. Nobody ever been to Colorado before, right? It's up near Aspen. And the 2 staff at the front on the bus are letting everybody know how disgruntled they are with their boss and their workday. So you have all these excited people ready to love this new adventure, and then you have this like taste in your mouth, right? So what are our people talking about? How are they showing up? That's an idea that comes to mind. Thinking about these things, and I'm not saying they're all good and bad. I just wanted to throw out a list for you before you chat about it. When you open registration at midnight and there's nobody working, right? I know national systems do that. Is that enhancing your customer service, or is that detracting from it, right? If people want to be able to walk in the door to register, can they do that at midnight? Are you going to go ahead and be open? So is it equal? Is it equity, right? Do you have a lottery system? Because some programs are so busy. Is registration first come, first serve, right? So being really intentional about thinking about those decisions and how do they drive that customer's experience they're going for. If you have a wait list and people are on that wait list, let's say it's for summer camp, do they know if they're number like 55, or do they know if they're number 1? Because if they're 55 and you're not adding programs, they are not getting in. Please tell them early. Let them go find a really great, safe, happy alternative place for their summer camp experience, okay? Do you have the ability to add programs? I know sometimes we We put all of our sessions out, 3-6 months early, and we pray that they all fill, or when they don't fill, we might cancel them last minute, we might cancel them early. But what if you had blocks of time for things that were so popular? You could add it once you knew what people really wanted that season. Okay, you could add it based on a trend. You could add it based on something else. Okay. Utilizing your evaluations if you're doing them. If you don't know where to start, I would say ultimately be more interested than interesting. Call and ask people how they're doing, send them an email, thank them for being a customer, register for your own programs. And make sure there's really good, accurate, clear information. All right, Matt tells me we're at time, so thank you so much. If you want to hop on, if you want to stay on for a minute and share a great idea with somebody else, you're welcome to. You certainly don't have to. This is, again, your time and your day. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for sharing with your peers and hopefully meeting somebody. We have one more webinar in this series. It'll be December 12th. Taking care of your people, and we would love to see you. So thank you so much. Thanks, KJ. Thanks, Joe. And thanks everybody for hopping on today.
Thank you all. Really appreciate your time.